Hi guys, thank you for that carrier update. Right now it's time to welcome our next live guest of the morning. We've got Caitlin Murphy with us, the CEO over at Global Gateway. Caitlin, thank you for joining us. We're excited to get your perspective on some of the port activity because we're going to kind of bookend you with Patrick Berglund from Soneta at the end of our show. So thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Well, let's kind of dig into kind of this generalized situation around ocean shipping right now. We've got Shanghai coming back online. We've got this really kind of downhill plunge in demand right now.
Right.
What does that mean for our port situation?
Really, I think what's happening is what you're seeing with Shanghai coming back online, it's not going to be an immediate effect on the ports in the United States. It's roughly going to probably take at least 3 to 4 weeks, if not longer, for us to see a lot of that volume hitting the United States. That being said, one thing that's really interesting is the spot market, the spot rates really have fallen below contract rates. We're calling it Christmas in July for many importers because after 18 months of record high spot rates, it's kind of nice to have a cooling down of the spot market. But a lot of that is because there's still a lack of demand coming out of China in terms of containers that need to get on ships. And part of what we're seeing is actually a lot of the reasoning for that is because a lot of importers shifted from just-in-time inventory to really having that safety net of inventory. And so we believe that a lot of importers are ordering less of certain SKUs, especially coming up for this peak season. And so we don't think this peak season is going to be as strong in terms of volume as it was last year.
And thank you, Caitlin, and welcome to the show. Excuse me for my throat situation there. But so you're seeing this as more as a rising tide as things kind of come online, but nothing that's going to like swallow our ports or cause a massive backup. Is that right?
No, right. So where I'm seeing massive backups actually is what we call the IPI, the inland points. So right now, Chicago Rail has become one of the newest points of severe container congestion in the U.S. The increased traffic affects the chassis market, which basically means there's not enough chassis to pull loaded containers out of the rail terminal. We deal with it every day on a lot of the containers that we route to Chicago, struggling to, even though we've got the drivers there waiting at the ports, there's no chassis for them to pull these loaded containers. And in addition, we're also seeing that some of the East Coast ports like Newark and Charleston, they've got average delays now exceeding 7 days, which is a little bit abnormal in our experience for those specific ports. So I do think that, we're still dealing with this congestion. It's just shifting into different regions of the United States. So as LA Long Beach gets a little bit more cleaned up and there's less of a backlog at their terminals, now what you're seeing is the backlog that was created at their terminals is now creating a backlog in these inland point terminals for rail, like Chicago and several other inland points. Like Memphis is another one that we've experienced some issues with chassis and equipment availability. So, I don't think we're going to go into as massive of a congestion as we experienced during last peak season for Christmas in Long Beach, LA. And I think a lot of importers and exporters too, they learned how to diversify. They started using separate ports of import. So if they were bringing goods into the Midwest and were very used to using LA Long Beach, now they've shifted into certain ports like Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk, with rail service to those inland points.
Well, last week we were talking to some folks about that exact problem, about the fact that now the congestion is living inland at these inland ports and how now there's not a lot of focus on it, right? The congestion at the West Coast ports drew a lot of focus and a lot of criticism from the public, from the government, and from the media as a whole. And that kind of led to that change, right? I think that's one of the main reasons that the Ocean Shipping Reform Act passed so quickly, was just because of the increased attention on the problems at the ports.
Right.
Do you think that now this push of congestion into the inland ports will draw that same amount of attention, and then we'll see kind of that same almost government intervention, private and public intervention into that situation there as we did on the ocean ports? Or do you think that it's now going to be kind of lost in translation because it exists in the middle of the country, maybe in these locations that aren't as sexy, I would guess, to talk about?
Right. Well, I think you have to look at it in a couple ways. First, the rail is not the same in terms of the regulations. So the FMC really is the oversight committee on a lot of the maritime trade. Well, rail operates a little bit differently. There's different levers there, pushing and pulling. So I think that's an aspect to it in terms of the government intervention. Now, I will say that there's still a lot of private intervention that's happening right now. I believe it was BNSF and Union Pacific possibly, where they'll actually say, listen, we're not going to route any more trains out of the West Coast for the next 7 days until we clean up congestion. So I actually believe that the rail is a little bit more proactive than maritime ports in terms of how to quickly get rid of the congestion, really move freight through their terminals to keep freight moving at origin, such as Oakland or LA or Tacoma. So I do think that the rail, they're not new to congestion. They have a lot of implementations that they'll use. And like I said, they'll just completely cut service for 7 days until they have enough of a clearing out of the current containerized freight that's sitting at their terminals.
Yeah, the railroads.
And then of course,
no, go ahead, please.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, in terms of public intervention, really, it's the same thing. Freight forwarders, NVOCCs, importers, exporters, they have choices. They have decisions that they can make. So if, for instance, Chicago is extremely congested, look at optionality. Look at what Memphis Rail Yard looks like. Look what Kansas City looks like. Yes, it may be a little bit more in terms of that last mile having to do drayage from Kansas City to somewhere in Illinois versus Chicago to Illinois inland points. But in the whole scheme of things, if you're saving 2 weeks of delay on rail, in some cases, that's absolutely something that the importer is willing to look at, to pay a few $100 to $1,000 more for the last mile versus having cargo sit and wait and really starting to affect their overall supply chain and the cost that would ensue with that.
Yes. So, Caitlin, I'm interested real quick. One of the changes that occurred and stresses on society bring about, new technology and advancements, et cetera, and hopefully improvements. But one of those was, like you said, BCOs, shippers, importers, using different ports, going to the West ports, et cetera. We even had the director of the Port of Cleveland, Ohio, looking at opening up and making the case that, coming down the St. Lawrence Seaway into Cleveland, Ohio, was a good way to hit the Midwest through with containers, right? Does this become sticky? Are you seeing that? Is this a sticky solution that's going to keep moving forward even as congestion dwindles?
Absolutely. So something that is really exciting that is happening, and my company, Global Gateway Logistics, has been a huge advocate for this. We call it container on vessel service. So there's firms that are out there, American Patriot Holdings is one of them, that's building these vessels to be able to navigate inland waterways such as the Mississippi River. But for the first time, do it in a much more eco-friendly, rapid way than normalized barges. And so what we're seeing is that there's already port terminals that are being built out, networks that are starting to flourish. There's a lot of government spending. So I'm from St. Louis, so St. Louis is one of them. I'm really proud that Missouri's government has stepped up and has earmarked funds just to build out help building out that St. Louis terminal for this type of operation. And so it's really this interconnected mode of transportation where the overall steamship line will dock at a port south of New Orleans, and then essentially the containerized cargo is going to get loaded onto these inland waterway vessels and brought up the Mississippi River. So versus having to bring cargo into the West Coast and rail it to Memphis, now the ocean-going vessel can dock. That container goes on to a container on vessel, and then goes directly to a new port being built on the Mississippi River for Memphis. So in theory, not only are our importers going to get their cargo a lot faster, you're reducing these bottlenecks of transit time. The studies that they've done actually on the soybean market have shown that it'll be roughly about a 30% savings versus going West Coast rail. So I believe not only is it sticky, it's happening. And I think don't quote me on it, I believe the first vessel should be finished at some point next year. And then I know that the first lane to come online is going to be from the Port of Plaquemines to Memphis. And then soon following after, St. Louis, and Joliet, Illinois.
That's awesome. And it's definitely a solution that I think is timely and well in the making. Caitlin, thank you for joining us. Of course, great to have you as always. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a great holiday weekend. Right now, we're going to take another quick break and we'll be right back.